This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room.
Okay, members, you're all welcome to a meeting of the Justice Committee, and we're obviously broadcasting. Members, if you can do the needful with any electronic devices, if they can be put onto the airplane mode and silent mode and kept away from the mics, that would be appreciated. The informal deliberations on domestic abuse and consideration of the other issues that not currently covered in the bill will be reported by Hansard, as is the normal protocol. The newly appointed Clerk Assistant, Frank Geddes, has responsibility for the Bill Office, and he will be observing the sessions of the bill, including any closed session, and he's just listening in via Starleaf. Again, members, this is the appropriate stage. If there's any declarations of financial or other relevant interests in respect of today's business, now's the time to declare them. If not, we'll proceed. We've no apologies at this stage. And Sinead Bradley is joining us in from Starleaf. Oh, sorry, Sinead. Gemma Dolan is joining with us on the Starleaf. And there's no one has delegated their vote, Christine, today?
No, all members are here.
Okay. Draft minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of September, pages 5 to 10 of the meeting pack are the relevant papers. If members are content that they're a true reflection of proceedings, then I will sign them accordingly. Agreed.
Agreed.
2 items under matters arising. First item is the Domestic Abuse and Family Proceedings Bill. Written evidence from individuals, pages 12 to 14 of the meeting pack, and page 3 of the table pack has the relevant papers. One further written submission on the Domestic Abuse and Family Proceedings Bill has been received from an individual and is included at page 12 of the meeting pack. At our meeting on the 3rd of September, the committee considered additional requests from individuals for informal meetings and agreed that in view of the limited time remaining to complete the committee stage of the bill, it isn't feasible to schedule any further informal meetings. The individuals were provided with an opportunity to submit written comments for the committee's consideration, and one such response was received, and it is in your meeting pack. That individual, the Reverend Stephen Jones, has written in follow-up to an informal meeting held on the 3rd of July, and that is also included at page 3 of your table pack. So members are just asked to note the submission, and this additional correspondence can be drawn upon as required to inform committee deliberations on the bill. Item 2 is the updated forward work programme for September. The oral evidence session with departmental officials on the Victims' Pension Scheme has been scheduled for Tuesday the 29th of September at 12:45 p.m. It's the only item on the agenda for that meeting, and an updated forward work programme has then been provided, and it's in the meeting pack for members' information. So Tuesday the 29th at 12:45 for the Victims' Pension Scheme briefing from departmental officials. Agenda item 4, Domestic Abuse and Family Proceedings Bill, the research paper on domestic abuse commissioners. So pages 20 to 66 of the meeting pack is the relevant papers. The committee did commission a research paper on the position adopted in other jurisdictions and evidence of good practice in relation to having a domestic abuse commissioner or a champion or other alternative approaches, and members are asked to note that research paper which members can draw upon as part of the deliberations of the bill. Unless there's more information needed at this stage, we will note that report, and I'm sure it'll be referred to in agenda item 6. So agenda item 5 is taking us to the Domestic Abuse Family Proceedings Bill. This is just to further deliberate on what was in the bill clauses. Then we'll move to the other issues at item 6 on the agenda. So pages 68 to 100 of the meeting pack and pages 5 to 16 of the tabled pack has the relevant papers. At last week's meeting, the committee discussed the clauses of the bill and reached a position on a number of them. The committee also requested a range of further information from the department, and that has been provided in pages 5 to 16 of the tabled pack. The Bill Clerk, Stephanie, is in attendance at the meeting and will provide advice requested by the committee on possible amendments. In accordance with normal protocol, this will be in closed session. So I'm going to receive that after we have a discussion on not just these issues, but the issues that aren't covered in item 6. Just for speed of time, it'll be a better way rather than moving from closed back to open and then back into closed session. So we'll work through the rest of the clauses that were in the bill, and then we will move to the next item on the agenda. But this is just the clauses that are in the bill, and we can discuss the issues that were raised and indicate our contentment with the clauses and any proposed amendments, or if there's any further information that we need to get. But we're getting very much to the closing stage of reaching a position on these. Again, just to remind members, when accepting a clause or amendment, members can express views, make comments, and the committee can also make recommendations, for example, with regard to the implementation of or outworking of a clause, and these can then be reflected in the committee report to the bill. So I'll just go through the areas that we had got some additional information on, and clauses 1 to 4. The committee agreed that we were content with clauses 1 to 4 as drafted, but requested further clarification on the rationale for adopting a different approach to the Scottish legislation, which limits the offence to partners and ex-partners, and where the definition that is included in the 2016 Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence and Abuse Strategy, and upon which the officials indicated the decision in relation to this legislation was based, came from and who had input into it. In response that was received yesterday, the department indicated that around 35% of domestic abuse crimes involve a family relationship. Therefore, it is considered important that the offence is not limited simply to intimate relationships. The department also highlights that the scope of the Stopping Domestic and Sexual Violence and Abuse Strategy and the position in terms of the coverage of domestic abuse was agreed following consultation with key stakeholders, and the content and scope of the bill was agreed by a multi-agency task and finish group. So are members content to note that, and we can proceed now, having informally accepted clauses 1 to 4 based on that information.
Can I just raise an issue? If we are prepared to do something on field strangulation and rough sex, then I'm not sure that whether they should stand fast as individual clauses or whether they need to be contained within clause 2 what amounts to abusive behaviour. So it might be, whilst I support the content of 2 at the minute, it may well be that we need to add something in there on those issues, topics, and maybe have a standalone clause also, but just so that I record that probably at this stage. May have to.
We will get to that on the other issues, because there is an issue in terms of if you want to apply new offences, what would be the scope of those offences if it relates to what is currently in these clauses, and that's, I think, a discussion that we need to have amongst ourselves and also with Stephanie around what would that look like. But you're right, if there is a new offence to be added as it relates to this current definition, that is where it would relate to. But that's a broader, I think, conversation that we're going to have Rachel, were you wanting to come in on that point?
Well, that's okay. I can wait until we get on to that later.
Okay.
Same thing. We'll wait until we're having the...
Okay. Clauses 5 and 18, meaning of personal connection. The committee agreed that it is content with other aspects of the meaning of personal connection, but agreed to request clarification of where the department's understanding of the term affinity and its view that it covers adoptive parent-child, foster parent-child and kinship care-child relationships comes from, whether this is a legal definition, further information on the opinion provided by DSO, and given that stepchildren are specified in the clause, is there any reason why the relationships that fall within the term of affinity should not be specifically set out in legislation? The committee agreed to consider this clause once we got further information. So the department has responded, indicating that in previous correspondence, officials advised that the terms adoptive parent-child, foster parent-child and kinship carer-child relationships would come within the scope of parental responsibility rather than be covered by the term affinity, albeit that such relationships are dealt with under the parental responsibility provisions. Rachel?
Thanks, Chair. I'm not too sure if maybe I'm not looking at the same answer, but I don't think that answers any of the questions that we put to the department in terms of what affinity means, further information on the opinion provided by the DSO, unless it's somewhere else. But I'm not too sure if that actually answers the committee's questions on the term affinity.
My reading of that is that they're saying that it's not necessarily an affinity, but under parental responsibility that those areas are covered. Christine, are you wanting? Can you shed any more light on that?
I think the answer they've sent, that is what they're saying, but they haven't answered the questions that were raised about the term affinity. There's nowhere else they have answered, Rachel. That's the answer they've given. So I suppose it depends whether you're content that they've answered where it falls under, or whether you still have those questions around the use of the term affinity. And we can go back on that.
Okay, members.
I would be. They're saying that it's covered, but the specific questions on the use of the term affinity is not within that answer, and that's what the committee had requested, especially the DSO opinion, which we haven't been given. So I'm content that they're saying that it does cover it, but it's just that the specific questions that the committee have asked have not been answered.
Okay, members. The formal clause by clause list starts on the 1st of October, so there is, if members want to go back to say we want to know what affinity covers, I'm happy that we go back to them and ask explicitly on what affinity covers.
That's the question.
Okay, so then we will park that clause until we get that response then, which is clauses 5 and 18. Clause 9. Aggravation where relevant child is involved. Committee raised 2 issues regarding clause 9. In relation to the first, it was agreed to request further clarification of why in the bill a child is not considered a victim in their own right, to what extent the proposed amendment being considered in conjunction with the Department of Health will address this. Also, if there were multiple children in a home, for example 4 children, and each one was classed a victim in their own right under this legislation, would one incident result in an offence against the victim and an offence against each child under this clause, i.e. 5 separate offences? The Department has stated that it gave careful consideration to the scope of the domestic abuse offence to ensure that children could be captured within it in their own right, where they are in a relationship or a family member, except where parental responsibility applies, to avoid criminalisation of this, and that aggravation related to a child could be reflected. It has outlined the purpose of the proposed amendment. It is currently discussing with Health, the wording of which will be provided as soon as possible, has indicated that assuming such an amendment is accepted, each child as set out in the scenario provided by the committee could potentially be a victim of that offence, but this will depend on the individual facts and circumstances of the case. The committee is also concerned that while there is an assumption in this clause that harm has been done with the reference to seeing, hearing or being present, and that this is not specific or clear enough, noting the wording of clause 5, subsection 5 of the Scottish legislation, which states that For it to be proved that the offence is so aggravated, there does not need to be evidence that a child had ever had any awareness of or understanding of A's behaviour or been adversely affected by A's behaviour. The committee believes that to ensure effective enforcement and prosecution, the wording of the Clause 9 needs to be strengthened to reflect this position much more clearly, and request the Department's view on this. The Bill Clerk has also considered this for the committee. The Department has stated that it is considered that the offence locally in relation to child aggravation is wider than the Scottish offence, in that there is no requirement for a reasonable person to consider that the behaviour would adversely impact on a child, or that the child has to live with either the victim or the offender. Given this, there is no associated condition that a child does not have to be aware of the abusive behaviour. The child aggravator applies if at any time in the commission of the offence a relevant child sees, hears or is present during an incident of abuse, they are used to abuse another person, or abusive behaviour is directed at them. The clause does not provide that the child has to have an awareness of, be adversely affected by or understand the behaviour, and as a result it is considered that an amendment akin to the Scottish legislation is not needed. So in those two areas, members, in respect of Clause 9, if there's any comments members want to make on that, or if you're content given the responses that we've received. Members content? Sorry, Rachel?
Thank you. No, just in terms of the first part with regard to child victims, obviously we don't have a copy of the Department of Health's amendment, so I don't think I could give any, being content with it, because we don't know what it says.
Yes, but sorry, I suppose I meant I'm content with what they're trying to do. Obviously we need to see the precise wording, but if the amendment does what we're being told there, if we're content in terms of the principle around that, then we're going to have to see the wording, but we haven't got it yet, and we may not get it, so that will present its own challenge for the department as to why they haven't been able to provide that to us yet.
And then I suppose just with the second part, there's still something not sitting right with me without having that specifically written down in the legislation, with regard to the child not having to actually see, hear, be present for. There is a reason that it's in Scotland and it's not here, and I know that the department are saying that they don't think it has to be in it because of the way that it's set out and our scope, but I do think that this needs to be considered as just an additional couple of words, because it's legislation, there's a reason for it being in there.
Well, we can touch on that with Stephanie. I'm content, but I'm happy that we get a view from Stephanie on that when we go into closed session as to that issue.
Just on those 2 points that Rachel raises, I think it's incumbent on this committee to work on a clause in the fact that we haven't seen a department clause. That might focus their minds a wee bit.
Okay, well listen, let's pick that up then with Stephanie in respect of Clause 9. Clauses 11 and 17, exception where responsibility for children and exception regarding the aggravation. The committee agreed to consider these clauses when the wording of the proposed amendment to child protection provisions currently discussed with the department is available. Further consideration will be given to these as soon as the text of the amendment is available. Clause 12, defence on grounds of reasonableness, and the committee agreed that it is content with Clause 12 as drafted, but concerns and comments of members would be reflected in the bill report. The committee also asked the department if it is aware of any examples in other jurisdictions where reasonableness defence has been used inappropriately. The department has outlined that officials previously liaised with their counterparts in other jurisdictions on this, and they've advised that they are not aware of difficulties in respect of the reasonable defence provision. Okay, members, so that was just some additional information. Members content to note that additional information around Clause 12?
Yeah.
Okay, Clause 13. Alternative available for conviction. The committee agreed to request further information and detail from the department on why Clause 13 is necessary, how it would work in practice, including the provision of a scenario or example illustrating this, and what the implications would be if it was removed from the bill. Committee is also concerned that the wording of the clause did not clearly reflect the explanation of the purpose of the clause provided by officials, and agreed to ask the Department to reflect on how the wording of the clause could be changed, enhanced to better reflect its purpose. So the Department has outlined this provision is intended to deal with the scenario where it is considered that there may be what is considered abusive behaviour. However, the personal connection which needs to be proved for domestic abuse offence is challenged by the defence and is then not proven in court. In the absence of the provision, it may be that the person is not charged with any alternative offence, and while it's considered that this would most likely be the reason for an alternative offence having to be considered, the Department does not wish to be limited to this in terms of stipulating this in legislation, as it may not be the only scenario, and there may be other limited circumstances dependent on the individual circumstances of the case. The Department has indicated that it will amend the explanatory and financial memorandum to include this scenario as an example, and will also include it in the guidance to be produced on the new offence. So, members content with clause 13 in light of the further clarification and proposed action?
Chair, I am content with the reply, but it did make me ponder on, I say its validity in being there, and believe it should be, but the burden of proof on a relationship or domestic abuse, I think I would like to understand better. You know, what is evidential, what would be considered an evidential base to that? How would somebody go about proving? Because that is, you know, that will be the weakest chink. That could be where everything is dismissed, the whole bill, if somebody isn't able to.
Well, I'm happy that we ask around information to do with that.
Yeah, just information on it, Chair, if you would. Because everything becomes academic after that.
Well, when the offence is in legislation, obviously that's the offence, and then the PPS, the police, need to ensure that they have the evidence to meet the test. So I'm happy that we would ask what is the evidential material that you're going to need to meet that test. That I don't think precludes us from accepting clause 13.
Oh, not at all, so not at all, no. But I just realised that
would be useful to have.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, are members content then with clause 13? We'll seek that additional information so that the committee has that by way of information. Okay. Clause 22 was around special measures directions. It was agreed to return to this clause to give members the opportunity for further information to be provided by the Department in its correspondence dated 9th of September on the proposed amendments to require court rules to make specific provision in relation to special measures in family and civil proceedings for victims of domestic abuse and other offences. The committee also agreed to request confirmation that it is the Department's intention to adopt the recommendation of Women's Aid and the recommendation in the Gillen Review regarding a guarantee of special measures in the family court. The Department has confirmed that the proposed amendment in relation to special measures in family proceedings will require court rules to make provision so that victims of domestic abuse are automatically eligible for consideration of special measures in family proceedings. It will be for the court hearing the proceedings to determine whether it is necessary to make a direction for special measures in an individual case. Excuse me, the wording of the draft amendments will be provided as soon as possible. So if members are content that we would note the additional information, and we will consider that clause once we have the proposed text. Hopefully that's sooner rather than later. Okay, clause 25 was around guidance about domestic abuse. The committee agreed that it wants clause 25(1) changed from may to either will or must in relation to the provision of the guidance by the Department. The Department advised that the Minister will table an amendment to change the word may to must in clause 25. And then the Bill Clerk will also provide advice in relation to clause 25 when the committee moves into closed session. Okay. Clause 26, prohibition of cross-examination in person. around family proceedings. It was agreed that we would return to this clause to give members the opportunity to consider the further information provided by the Department that was dated the 9th of September on a proposed amendment to require court rules to provide for a court hearing civil proceedings to have a discretionary power to prohibit cross-examination in person, together with a proposed minor amendment to require a court considering whether to exercise its discretionary power to prohibit cross-examination in person, to have regard to findings of fact made in civil or criminal proceedings as well as family proceedings. The committee also agreed to request confirmation that the Department's intention to adopt the recommendation of Women's Aid in relation to an automatic prohibition of cross-examination in any family proceedings, where there are allegations of domestic abuse or where the perpetrator has admitted to domestic abuse, and recommendations in the Gillen Review relevant to court proceedings in domestic abuse cases. The Department has confirmed that in relation to the recommendation of Women's Aid, provision has already been made in the bill for an automatic prohibition to apply. In addition to the circumstances where a party has been convicted of, cautioned for, or is charged with a relevant offence, or had a relevant on-notice injunction made against them, where there is other specified evidence of domestic abuse. The other types of evidence of domestic abuse will be specified in regulations that the Department will consult on, and in cases where an automatic prohibition does not apply, a court will have a discretionary power to prohibit cross-examination in person. So are members content to note that additional information and then their views on clause 26, that we're content? Okay, so we're content with what they're wanting to do. We just need to see the legislative text for that amendment. Okay, so there's a couple of clauses there that are we can clear, that we've dealt with. There's a few then that we will park and we will come back to in the closed session with Stephanie. If members are content then to proceed to agenda item 6, which is other issues that were not currently included in the bill. Let me just stay with it for one second. Okay. So pages 19 to 150 of the table pack are the relevant papers for members. And members will know that there's been a wide range of issues raised in the evidence that's been received by the committee that are not currently covered in the bill, and we're now going to consider those, and also then the information from the Department in terms of their position around those issues. So the Department has provided an update in relation to the issue of guidelines to employers and recognising domestic violence as a workplace. The Department has outlined that the Minister for Economy has asked officials to give consideration to the issue of paid leave for victims of domestic abuse, alongside a range of other employment-related issues, as part of a longer-term vision for employment relations in Northern Ireland. Again, members, just advise that when we are considering the various issues, that the committee can decide whether it wishes to specifically comment on these issues, and the views expressed by the committee will then be included in the committee report on the bill. Whether any further information or clarification is required, and again, there's just a tight timescale for this, or whether consideration should be given to bringing forward amendments to make legislative provision for a specific issue in the bill. Again, if the committee is minded to make amendments to cover a specific issue in this bill, the purpose and desired outcome of the amendment needs to be clarified, and as previously mentioned, the Bill Clerk, Stephanie Mallon, is here and will be able to provide advice to members in closed session once we have considered all of these different issues. So if I can refer members to the Clerk's memo, which is pages 19 to 20 of your table pack. That will be the main reference point. For going through this. Okay, so the memo has outlined a whole range of different issues. Some of these you may want to have amendments. Some of them I think will be outside of scope, but that's something to discuss, and other issues will be in the report. And I'm not going to suggest to members that I go through each and every point on this. I'm going to ask members where there are areas. I have a number that I want to bring forward, which my colleagues will outline, but that's going to be more my party's position on these amendments that we would like to see brought forward. But rather than me as chair go through each of these, I'm going to invite members to indicate which one of these issues or a number of issues that you want to see amendments that the committee can bring, and then the committee can consider those, and ultimately whether the committee agrees or not still doesn't preclude members from tabling their own amendments. Linda?
I suppose, I mean, agree with you, not going through everything, because some of the stuff I think is stuff that has been raised by all of us in previous committees around the need for education and training and all of that kind of stuff, but I'm just not sure that it needs to be put in the legislation. I think there's a fairly good acceptance by everybody that all needs to happen. There's a couple of things, I suppose, just that first of all, that I don't think should be included for very good reasons. One of them is the issue that Paul raised around the fatal and non-fatal strangulation. Not because I wouldn't like to see it in this bill, because I would. But I think the department have been very clear, as have others, that there hasn't been enough work done to actually put something effective in there, and that would be my only concern. I want to see everything as quick as possible, but not quick at the expense of being good, you know, and that's really, I suppose, where we have to get the balance. I definitely would love to see something coming through in relation to that, but it needs to be right. And for me, that's important in all of this. And I think that whilst we want the domestic abuse legislation to go through, the one thing we've been careful so far with is making sure that we get things right and that we're getting information back and clarification. And it'll be very difficult, I think, in fairness to the department, to give us much clarification around that when they've already been very clear that the work isn't done. So that would be my concern around that particular issue. Just in relation then to the paid special leave for victims of domestic abuse, I think we just need to, and from what the responses we got back, the Economy Minister is responsible for that. Whether we can put an amendment in the end of this piece of legislation is what I want to know, because I think if we can, we should. It's already in place in terms of for public servants, so the Finance Department have already dealt with that end of it, but it's not in place for everybody else out there, and I think that it's important that it is. And if there's a possibility or potential for us to do this in this piece of legislation, I think we should do it. And I accept that the Economy Minister has said that she is looking at it, but for me this is as straightforward as sick leave. It's an absolute necessity for people. So I think if we can do it, we certainly should do it. I accept the issues around Operation Encompass, and I know that I'm aware that there's a pilot actually going to be started. I think it's in South Down, and I want to welcome that and thank the Education Minister for taking that initiative along with the PSNI. I would be concerned that I would actually be doing harm to the future of that by trying to again have to do something in this legislation. So I'm content that the Education Minister is running that pilot. I would be very keen to see it be more than a pilot and to be actually rolled out, but I will engage with my colleagues on the Education Committee and ask them to put the pressure there where it's needed. I know that, and also with my colleagues on the Policing Board around the PSNI and their role in it, I think it's really, really important. It's a vital tool in terms of protecting our children, looking after them and making sure that they get the best possible education. But it's wider than education. It's all about, you know, looking after them and ensuring that they're okay in that time when they're in school. So I think that's important, but not for this bill, to be fair. Then just in relation to the DAPOs and DAPNs, again, I just would like to be reassured that they will be in the miscellaneous bill. And I'm not convinced of why they're not in this bill, but I'm really keen that they are put in place. The only thing I would say is that the PSNI have raised concerns, and they're at the front face of it. If they've raised concerns and they're more content for it to be put into the miscellaneous bill when more work has been done, then, I mean, they are the people that are going to have to deliver on this, and I will accept their kind of guide in relation to this. That's all I have for the minute. I've another couple, but I think it'd be fair to let others in.
Okay. Let me outline, I suppose, from my perspective on behalf of my party areas, and then my colleagues are going to populate some of this. The areas that I would like to see amendments brought forward include, I do think we need to address the issue of a commissioner, domestic abuse, whether it's a commissioner, an advocate, a champion. We do need to consider some role which is being provided for in the Westminster legislation in England and Wales. The evidence that we've got that there should be some form of commissioner. Calling it a commissioner, I'm not precious about what the title is. It's always the powers that come with the office or with the person or what the purpose is. And I would like to get a more detailed conversation with the committee around what would that look like. And I have my own views around that as to what we need to have. And it may be around someone that's time limited even to carry out an implementation review of this legislation in a period of time with the power to make recommendations for what then needs to be put in place, and that could be monitoring what training has been carried out as a result of this, and within that mechanism a report, and that could then recommend the type of advocate, champion, commissioner that is maybe necessary. So I'm not clear in my mind at this stage as to what exactly would be needed by way of that type of person or what that role would be. But I do think we need to identify some kind of independent role for what this legislation is trying to do. And that's around the domestic abuse commissioner issue that we need to look at, because I just think it's something that we need to be considering, and I'm happy that we would try and pursue this area further, notwithstanding some of the issues around what the department's doing and wanting to consult further in respect of this. But some areas to consider would be, should the post, for example, be for a time frame, 3 years, indefinitely? Should it be full-time, part-time? Could the role oversee, scrutinise, monitor, implement legislation around effectiveness of what we're doing? And I would like to have a conversation with Stephanie as to how we could legislate for something on this, not being clear in our own minds what exactly that should be. And I would like to have a conversation around that. Stalking legislation is another area. I know the department has indicated that it's going to bring forward stalking legislation, and I would welcome that. But there is stalking legislation in other jurisdictions, and I would like to be pursuing inclusion of some stalking legislation provisions within this bill to ensure that the department do come forward with this bill. I'm content that bill may be the more appropriate stage to do it, but I would like to be starting to very clearly signal that this is something that we believe should be included in this bill. You need to come forward with your stalking legislation. But for fear that they don't, I would hate to have an opportunity to have included something around stalking and not taken the opportunity. And that applies then to some of these other broader points around the issue to do with non-fatal strangulation and the issue around rough sex. I take the point that Linda's indicated around non-fatal strangulation, a little bit more complex and so on. I'm going to ask Paul to comment more on that in a minute. It's an issue he's been particularly keen to pursue. The issue around rough sex, there's a very easy amendment that has been brought forward by the government in Westminster on the issue of rough sex, and I don't see why that isn't an amendment that we could be considering. So I would like to be having a discussion with Stephanie around what that would be, what that would look like for inclusion in this. On Operation Encompass, again, I take the point Linda's made. My concern on this would be when we have a pilot scheme, at the minute all being done voluntarily, if we then want to roll that out, the police department are saying there is no legislative cover to share information between the police and the education authorities. That's been the department has said that they don't have legislative cover to do this. So I'd be interested to know how their pilot scheme's working, given that they've said that we don't have legislative cover to do it. I would like to give legislative cover, not put a duty for this operation on campus to happen, or a duty on the police that they have to do this. But I wouldn't want in 12 months or 2 years for the police to be saying, actually, we want to do this, but we don't have legislative cover to do it, whenever there's potential that we could include it in this. And so I'd be keen to see, can we bring forward an amendment that would give that legislative cover around Operation Encompass.
Chair, can I just ask, because from the reading of the papers, my understanding is that it can't be given through this legislation because it's an educational setting. It actually has to come from the Education Department. So that's where, I mean, the same, I'm sort of looking at the same in terms of the Economy Minister's role. Can we actually put, so if someone, I would like clarification on that, can we put amendments into this that will come under the responsibility of another department? We can.
Well, it's not that we can't, it's not that we can. Scope of course is going to be an issue on this. That'll ultimately be a matter for the Speaker. If the Speaker decides it's not within scope of the bill, then it's not within scope of the bill. But there's nothing stopping this committee bringing forward amendments to legislation, and that's a clear signal of intent as well that we want this.
Then I would support that.
If it's ruled that it can't be included in this bill, this committee has then clearly signalled we want it included, whether that's going to be in education or whether it's in the Department for Economy, and it touches on the other issue around housing. There's an issue there that I would like to see us bringing forward a duty on the Housing Executive to deal with the issue around securing tenancies, but that is also being advised it may not be within scope. But there's still nothing stopping this committee from producing an amendment, and if the Speaker rules it out, it's ruled out. But that doesn't preclude us from pursuing it. So housing is another area that I would like to see us consider, as well as then the domestic abuse protection notices and protection orders. I'm not convinced about leaving that whenever it's there in England and Wales in that legislation. It's been brought up by nearly all of the stakeholders that they're not fit for purpose, and we need to have more modern notices and orders in place. And also then the issue around offences to do with upskirting. I want to see the inclusion of the offence of upskirting, but it does take us into this area around the conversation that we had earlier between clauses 1 to 4, that as currently scoped, this includes then the kind of connections that this bill relates to. The issue around the offence of upskirting is a much broader offence, but I would like to be considering, is that something that can be included in this bill? I note the department's position on this. Again, talk of inclusion in a miscellaneous provision bill, but if we have a vehicle to include this, then I would be prepared to try and pursue an amendment on that. And the last one that I want to get clarity on is around coercive abortions, because I do want to pursue this matter, the party does. The department's response to this is to say that they may believe that there's currently legislation in place around the 1861 Offences Against the Person Act. I find it remarkable that a department's response on such an important issue that carries a very severe sentence is saying it may exist. Either it exists or it doesn't. Now, I couldn't believe that that was the response, that a department can't categorically tell this committee, does this offence currently exist in our legislation? It may do. And then words around it would be up to the PPS and the PSNI. So I'm not going to pursue a position necessarily on that one, but I do want to get clarity from the department. Either it exists or it doesn't. To say that it may, I was baffled at that response. So that's 8 areas that I know my party wants to see pursued by way of amendments, and I'm happy that we would go into a further discussion around that with Stephanie, but I know Paul wanted to comment on some of these, in particular the non-fatal strangulation issue, but I'm going to ask Paul just to comment a little bit more on what I've said.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, on the piece on non-fatal strangulation, I do think that it needs to be included, because whilst there is catch-all clauses with regards to the definition of what amounts to abusive behaviour, I think because this is so prevalent in the domestic violence setting, that I do think that we need to send a message out there to the public that this is not acceptable. And there's two issues with strangulation. There's the non-fatal and then there's the fatal. On the non-fatal strangulation, I think a simple clause like a person A commits an offence. If that person unlawfully strangles, suffocates or asphyxiates another person B, where the strangulation, suffocation or asphyxiation does not result in B's death, something as simple as that included, I think, could go a long way. The rough sex defence, I think, is slightly different, because I think, if I'm right in GB, I've looked at the GB clause and I've reworded it to catch all, because I do think that, but I'll read out what I think should be a decent clause that could be attributed or inserted in. So rough sex defence, and this is not about the actual committal of a crime with regard to rough sex, it's about the defence of rough sex in a courtroom. So if a person A wounds, assaults, strangles, suffocates or asphyxiates another person B, to whom they are personally connected as defined in clause, that will be our clause 5 of this Act, causing death or injury, so that's covering both non-fatal and fatal. It is not a defence to a prosecution that B consented to the infliction of injury. And then second clause in that subsection applies whether or not the death occurred or injury, subsection 1, which is just read out, applies whether or not the death or injury occurred in the course of a shadow encounter. And that's where they talk about the 50 Shades scenario. So it's basically making sure that we're copper fasting the fact that a perpetrator can't walk into court and use it as a defence to say that the victim, who's either injured or dead, consented to rough sex. If someone dies or is seriously injured out of an encounter like that, then I believe it should be a crime, whether they consented or not. And if you look at it in the parameters of domestic violence, are we really saying that the victim's consent is sure, is true in that scenario, because of all the coercive control and all the bullying that has went on maybe for years? So that's the issue on those two issues, the rough sex defence. So it's so nobody, a perpetrator, can't walk into court and say consent was given and something went wrong. And then non-fatal strangulation to cover that, what I believe is prevalent out there. I can go on, Chair, but I have other issues to raise on other issues. Do you want me just to go through them quickly now?
Yeah, so I would like to collate just so that we know what are the, once you're finished, Paul, for other members, if there are any other issues that hasn't been, and then I'm going to go through, because I've taken a note of, Linda has mentioned a number, and I want to pull together the number of issues that members have. Then that means it can park the other issues that aren't going to require further consideration, albeit some of them in my mind are very important, but I just don't see the legislation as where it should be. So if you continue, Paul, and then if other members can put out their issues that they want to see potential amendments discussed, then we can have a more focused conversation on those, because I want to allow members to go through the amendments that our party would like to have.
So on secure tenancies, I think that there has to be something linking security of a home for victims. I don't think that, I think we exclude the victims a way out we take away a way out for victims if we don't add some sort of protection for victims. Victims will stay in a household because they have nowhere else to go, and they will take punishment. They will not leave that perpetrator with their child if they can't get that child a roof over their head, and even their own home in that regard. So I do think that there should be something on secure tenancies, and it could be as simple as placing a duty on the housing executive. I had thought about including associations, housing associations, but remember that it's the housing executive point system that the associations use when administering points. So I do think we need to place a duty on housing executive to administer points. Now, we can be selective as to how many points they should administer in a domestic violence setting, but the issue with that is if it's set in stone in legislation and there's a review of points in a housing executive and point system changes or is tweaked, then there's an issue there having it in legislation, I'm sure. So you might want to just leave it that the housing executive, there's a duty on the housing executive to take into consideration domestic violence and then administer points through a point system, as they do with intimidation, as they do with homelessness factors. So I think it's something the committee should look at. On Operation Encompass, I agree that one, it's an educational thing, two, but more so it's a police operational matter. And I'm not sure we need to legislate for a police operational matter, but I do think there's a barrier there for PSNI officers being free with information to people who really need to know, i.e. teachers and principals. So I think we should be looking at allowing PSNI and other safeguarding bodies the legislative cover to enable the sharing of information to schools for child well-being purposes. This is so that they don't fall foul to data protection law or GDPR, whatever it is. I never get that right. It's just to give them the cover and the confidence to be able to either pick up the phone to a principal the day after or the morning after and say, look, wee Johnny's been running about his garden 3 o'clock in the morning whilst his parents have been doing whatever. I know for sure that he will not have homework done. I know for sure that he will not be prepared for school. And if he does enter your building, please be assured of this, so that principals and teachers don't administer detention, don't give out some sort of form of punishment whenever something is not completed. And if the child in itself is distraught, stressed, and maybe has behavioural issues because of the scenario that he has just played out and lived through the night before, I do think that a teacher is one of the most important people that information should be told to, and I think we need to allow PSNI, albeit an operational matter, should give them the clearance and the protection to do so. As for the other issues that maybe are already covered in the Offences Against the Persons Act 1861, there's no reason why we can't refresh a clause and put it into a modern bill. For one reason, I don't know, I don't suggest this will ever happen, but imagine if an historic bill was repealed. Then you lose all that law. And if we have already modernised, then the fear of that is gone. And you've given it modernisation and protection there and brought it up to 2020. I do think that we need to consider seriously the domestic abuse protection notices and orders. We've been here so many times before where the department has promised certain orders, and even in low and good intention, something happens. There is no guarantees in democracy. We could be here today, gone tomorrow. So I think we take the opportunity when it arises, and this opportunity is now. And if the department are a wee bit worried about it, but you know something? They've got their miscellaneous bill coming. They can always amend and do things as they see fit. I would worry that we don't, as we see this term out, a miscellaneous bill does not come to the floor of the Assembly. That may be one way of applying pressure on the department to bring forward a miscellaneous bill. On stalking, and I'll finish on this, I'm struggling to do justice to stalking offence in a clause on this bill, but I do think we need to add something in, even if it's a catch-all, because as I've just said with regards to the miscellaneous bill, there are no guarantees in legislation. Until I see the stalking bill come to first reading, I just don't believe that it's going to be here. And that's just my cynicism. Now, I know it's sitting there waiting. There's no reason why the department can't bring it. There's no reason why the department can't bring it next week. If the department brings it next week, we see what's in the face of the bill, and then we do not have to amend this bill on a stalking piece. It's simple. Just bring forward the stalking bill next week or the week after. Get it into the business office and get it onto the floor of the Assembly so we can see it. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Okay. Other members? Sinead?
Thank you, Chair. Having looked at it, and I welcome the contributions from other members, because it sort of is reassuring to know that there seems to be a lot of weight around a lot of shared issues here. But I suppose coming at it from our perspective, I looked at this in 3 categories, and that first piece being the preventative piece, you know, which we've all talked to, and we've talked about training and about educational programmes. And with any piece of legislation, I think that's always a smart place to start. You know, if you can prevent anything of this sinister nature happening in the first place, there should definitely be a direction towards that and a commitment to supporting something in that realm. Moving on then to the event where something has happened and this legislation is there then to, and I'm staying true to the nature of it, is there to support victims, empower victims, and ensure victims feel that by coming forward justice will be served. And with that in mind, I think taking a very victim-centred approach from the outset has to run through the bill. And that is why I think in the instance where a victim has come forward and has triggered this bill for action, there should be an immediate piece that looks at the implications of doing that for the victim. And that means understanding their personal circumstances and putting behind them all the support they need. And that will be things which may be relevant to them, may include paid leave, it may include housing, it may include, if this is a person who has responsibility for children or a caring responsibility, that they are supported in every aspect of their life, to allow them to maintain some type of normality while they take on the turmoil of going through a case like this. So all of those building blocks to support the victim would be very keen to see. Now, I'm not precious about what heading they have, or if we find a shared space on saying, yes, this is the piece where we are going to support that victim at that very, very vulnerable early stage. And then I suppose my reservations are, there is the terminology abusive behaviour, and then there have been very compelling and strong cases made to this committee about particular behaviours that I don't doubt for a moment would be considered abusive behaviour. But when we start becoming prescriptive on what that is, I have this fear in the back of my mind, what are we leaving out? You know, and I'm really cautious of that. And that's not that I don't fully support people coming forward and saying, you know, this behaviour or that behaviour, and I get that, and I do fully support it. But how do we make sure that that does not lessen any behaviour that we didn't prescribe or name? And just by virtue of the new world we live in as well, I'm really conscious that we've mentioned it, and it seems to go to the periphery at times, is the whole online type of abuse that can happen. It doesn't necessarily have to be in person. It could be a part of a continuation of abuse, and I'm not sure that we've spoken maybe in enough detail on how we can bring that into the bill or acknowledge how it fits into the abusive behaviour scenario. And then I suppose finally it is then looking at the final piece in that you know, that we're hoping justice can and will be served. And I did take that final clause where we, you know, where the relationship can be proven. I think that is an important piece, that it's there. But also then into the realms of, do we create that register? Do we create, what is the aftermath of this bill? If somebody is found guilty and coming through the system, is it on par? I just want to measure it against other registers. Would it be that we have missed an opportunity, or it suggests that it's of more leniency to other crimes that do require somebody to go on a register? And I think we need to really weigh that up as a final piece on the end outcome on this. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, just so because I want to come back later, just so I can summarise. So there's an issue around training, around the agencies and being ready for this legislation, around the training side of it. How do you support victims? So that kind of support structure for victims, then understand around the term of abusive behaviour, but recognising what do you then leave out if you go down a prescriptive route, around proving the relationship side of it, and then is there a need for a register?
Yeah.
You know, in terms of okay. Rachel.
Thanks, Chair. A lot of what I have in terms to comment and question on have already been raised, so I'll not go into them that haven't already been raised by other members. But in terms of just with the DAPOs and DAPNs, I think that we certainly need to look at the Scottish model of what they're doing. So they're doing emergency borrowing orders, and the consultation has been out on that. And certainly Women's Aid in Scotland would be much more supportive of emergency borrowing orders than they would of the DAPO and DAPNs currently in operation in England and Wales. So I think that's something that we need to get more information on. I would have quite a big concern on the lack of, or on the data collection and monitoring of this legislation, just coming from an operational side. And this links to the reporting aspect that was brought up. Certainly it's something I've been working on in terms of amendments, but I think we need to have a streamlined approach in terms of how data is collected, both from PSNI, PPS and the judiciary, and also just facilitating data sharing, because that's obviously an issue. Training was mentioned, but I think it should be made mandatory in statute. There is to come up time and time again that the judiciary and criminal justice system must be trained. So we're better to have that training in legislation than it actually written down, and that it needs to be done. Also, I would have concerns about resourcing and funding. There obviously is a need to allocate much more to the community and voluntary sector, as they're the ones that generally are picking up the support, but also a statutory duty for sufficient resources in the interests of the operation of the Act. I think something that we need to be looking at, and certainly something that I have been looking at. And then also with regard just to the issues that have been on this list, a violence against women and girls strategy, I think that's something that we absolutely need to consider. Specific strategies to deal with gender-based violence. We're the only part of the UK that doesn't have one. And I think that without one, we are not meeting our Istanbul Convention requirements, and I appreciate that the department currently has a strategy with the Department of Health, but it is gender neutral, as we know, and I would be really concerned that in the absence of one, that the specific gendered nature of domestic abuse is not being fully considered in Northern Ireland. I have many more things that I could go on, but those are the specific ones that haven't been raised. Finally then, I suppose, is the equality screening, and it was quite an interesting response from the Children's Law Centre with regard to Section 75 and the impact assessment. So I would be looking for an update on the Department of Health and the Department of Justice on that.
Okay, Doug.
Chair, thanks. First of all, can I say, Chair, I mean, the depth of scrutiny here is really quite impressive. I mean, it really is. I'm really impressed with people within this room and the way we're looking at this. It really is good. Chair, if I can just raise a couple of things, please. First of all, the Victims of Crime Commissioner is a motion I have before the Assembly which is not related to this but will have an effect on this. Those who will know that I've raised this with the Justice Minister in regards to crime, and it was based around a double murder in Portadown, not based around this. But a Victim of Crime Commissioner is a motion that will be going before the Assembly, and I hope that we'll have had some movement on that. So it has an absolute effect on this. So I just let you know that, Chair. I do have a concern about parental alienation. I know that when we had the evidence sessions, they said they didn't want to list a whole raft of different issues, but I think there's a very specific issue around parental alienation and contact denial, and that slips into the non-molestation orders and contact orders as well. And I fundamentally think that I think it's, and I could be confused, but either the Scottish model or the English and Welsh model has a very specific clause in it which says about parental alienation, and I honestly do think we need to go down that road and name that particular one, and I'm not in the game of trying to name all of the different circumstances, but parental alienation is something that my party certainly wants to look at in more detail. And the last one, if I can, Chair, and I know that there was an awful lot more, but it's been mentioned in such depth already by other people. And I have to give this as a view from a committee member, and it's not a party view, but where we talked about coercive abortion, and I think we've had this discussion before, Chair, if we're going to look at abortion, coercive abortion, we must look at coercive prevention of access to abortion. One can't come without the other. They must be viewed in the round. So where people are coercively stopped or forced to get an abortion, there are women out there who are coercively prevented from access to abortion. And if we start looking at that aspect of it, we must look into how that fits into the abortion bill, because then that will have an effect on that bill at a later stage, because women can then raise the issue that they're outside the time frame for a legal abortion purely because of coercion. So it has a spin-off, Chair. So I know you're looking more detail. I get that. I'm happy with that. And I'm talking as a private member. That's not a party issue. It's my issue. But certainly prevention of access to abortion. And that's me, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any other issues? Yes.
I would just like possibly a wee bit more information on the around the stalkers and the domestic abusers, the register. I think we need to look at that. We need to see what the potential. The department have said they're happy at this stage, but I think we need to see what the potential benefits of a general register would be.
Chair, could I add, because they did say that it isn't actually a register.
It
is
a notification requirement.
Yes, but I suppose we use that title as an understanding of the realm that we're looking into, and if there's any merit in it or none.
Because I'm going to go back through this list to give everyone an opportunity to comment on them. So I just want to complete a kind of a list. So if there's not any issues yet that's on the clerk's memo that members, I'm going to take it that if it hasn't been brought up, that all of those are meritorious. They will be in the report. But if members haven't mentioned them, then I want to keep the conversation on the areas that we want to look at in more detail around legislative provision. Linda?
Just a couple of points of information just in relation to the issue around housing. There is currently a review of the points system, and some of that is based on the fact that we have been raising over the last number of years that you could get intimidation points for sectarian or for your sexual orientation, but you couldn't get intimidation points if you were the victim of domestic abuse. And we very often had the perpetrator actually claiming intimidation points because he had abused his wife, and therefore he was now under threat and getting a house, and his partner and potentially children were being left with no points. So and I think that is definitely something, going by what the Minister actually said in the Chamber this week, that she has an eye to. So I would like to think that is in there, but I think we could actually ask for a wee update on where they're at with that, if that's helpful. I do think we should get that. And then just in relation to the idea of the Commissioner, I actually was betwixt and between and was listening to all the arguments around a commissioner and whether it should be a commissioner for crime or specific commissioner around this. And I'm still open to all the arguments and to listen to it. I think if we are going to consider a commissioner, then based on some of the stuff actually that Rachel said, would it be a commissioner for domestic abuse and gender violence in general? So, that domestic and sexual abuse, and that be the gender-based? And then would the commissioner have the potential to pick up all the pieces that we have said are really, really important, but maybe not to be put in legislation because you just would be the bill wouldn't be through in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
But they're really important. Are those the things that we should actually be saying? Those are the things we should be looking to as the areas that the commissioner could pick up. So around the training and the education piece and the funding and working with all of the other departments, even in relation to the housing issues, working with the department in relation to that, working with the health department. So it's that person to link up and to look at all the things that we weren't able to put in legislation, but make sure that they are implemented.
Yeah.
It's just I suppose something for us to think about. It's not a hard and fast.
Let's have a bit more of a conversation around these key areas that we've highlighted that some parties, I want to start saying if there's a broader committee view on what some individuals would like to see brought forward, because that'll help give us a little bit of structure. But if I can just close off some of the other issues, and I'll highlight just a couple. For example, nobody has mentioned multi-agency collaborative approach should be in legislation. I'm taking that as read. That should be happening. We don't need to legislate for it. That's why I haven't put it in as an area that we've received evidence on. That I don't believe that requires legislation. So no member has mentioned that because it should be happening. And another example, a public awareness campaign. Again, I don't feel that there should be a need to legislate for that. It should happen. I don't think we need to be putting that in legislation. So that's why I didn't mention it. I think those are all very important and should be happening, and that can be referenced in the bill, these areas that we haven't felt should be brought forward by way of legislation. These are all important issues, but they will form the report. Just so that we can focus our conversation on what legislative text we think could be considered. And again, we're not asking for final decisions on this. We need to talk about, are these areas we would like to see potential drafts on. Then we'll go into closed session with Stephanie to tease out this issue. We can see the draft amendments before people need to say yes or no as by way of something that the committee can do. But if we can pick up then on some of the issues, Linda had mentioned the paid special leave around the Department for the Economy, and I can get the argument there that should be with the Department for the Economy to take forward. In the same way, there's an issue that members brought up around child contact orders. I'm not sure which, but there's an amendment coming through that deals with one aspect of that. But the defence here that the broader child legislation is with the Department of Finance, and that, I suppose, leads us into the housing stuff. Where is that another department? So if we can touch on those three areas at the moment, just because they're areas that other departments may be responsible for, and that includes Operation Encompass around education. So if those four areas, I'd be keen to tease out with members their views in respect of that as to whether or not we should be trying to pursue an amendment.
Chair, on the leave, I think it is an important issue. I suppose the public sector, we would assume there is a case for, a sympathetic line manager who's caring and is aware would grant special paid leave. But I do worry about the fear people would have of bringing forward the issue and making their line manager aware of it because of the stigma, and just the worry that their colleagues and associates out there would know about something, I suppose, they want to keep hidden or keep to themselves. So and then the private sector is I suppose the biggest concern, that people are going to be able to get special paid leave. I think it is something we need to look closely at. and make sure that the legislation covers it. I suppose more and more the private sector is under pressure to give special paid leave to people in various circumstances, and it is right, but they do push back against it because of the costs and obviously the implications for running the business. But I do think something needs to be put in there to make sure those that are working in both sectors have equal protection. The issue about the Operation Compass, I've said before, I'm still not sure the police are the people that are going to be best placed to do this. A lot of children are in schools, as you probably are aware, under a register, kept a register, and are supported by the social services, and therefore schools are aware of a lot of those cases. But I'm not sure that the police have a direct role in this, and still remain to be convinced. I think we're all aware that the police work at different levels of interest and different levels of competency, and some officers would be good at this and others would not be good. So I suppose the training again comes into it. But I remain to be convinced that the police should be rushing into a school. I know they don't have to physically rush in, but have to communicate directly with the school on this issue. It is a huge issue for the police. They keep telling us domestic violence and domestic issues, I suppose, to be fair, is one of the biggest responsibilities they now have. And how do they define what is an incident at home? If there's a shouting match, which happens between families, is that classified as domestic abuse and something that should be reported to school? I think these issues are difficult, and I'm not sure the police have a real direct role in it, and I think something we should look at closely. But generally, Chair, I'm happy with the points that have been made to date.
Okay. Linda?
I certainly think we should be looking at them, and particularly, I mean, that was my only query around the Operation Encompass stuff, is that I was concerned that we were figuring out of what would be the scope. But if that's up to the Speaker, then I'm content to at least give it a go. Just in terms of, to address some of the points that Gordon has raised, you know, to say that some of them will be good and some of them will be bad, it's the responsibility of the PSNI to make sure that whoever's bringing that information to the school is good. That, you know, it's not good enough to say some will be good and some will be bad. Some are good and some are bad at everything they do, let's be honest. But we don't use it as an excuse not to deal with all of the issues that we have to deal with every day. And really the only responsibility for the PSNI in that is to make the school aware there was an incident at the home last night. It's not, they don't need to give the details of the incident. It's actually should not be given the details of the incident. Is simply to make the school aware there was an incident at the home last night and we were called out and either the child had to be removed from the home. It's just to make, it is literally just to make a school aware that if a child comes into school on that morning, that they may well not have had breakfast, they may well not have had any sleep all night, so that if they don't have their homework done, their uniform isn't right, or they just don't seem to be right that day, that they're getting that little bit of extra support instead of, where is your homework? Why have you not got your tie on? It's those little things are so important, you know, but they are quite, they're small things, but they're massively important to the child and their ability to get education and get the support they need in school. So that's really what it's about. And it does work well in other areas where it has been rolled out. It works really well and has had a very positive response. So I do think, for me, Operation Encompass is an important one. Then around the special leave, again, and I suppose Gordon said it himself, this is around making sure that both sectors are getting treated equally. And at the moment they're not, because in the public sector, you have access to this special leave, but in the private sector you don't. And I understand all the challenges that the private sector have. I've worked in it, you know, for many years as well, so I understand, and worked in the public sector. But people are not going to abuse something like domestic abuse special leave, realistically. And we already know that people take that time off, but they just take it as sick. And that might still happen, because you're right, people won't always want to say, I suffered a domestic abuse incident, or I'm involved in domestic abuse, but I do know circumstances where people have went to their employer and said, you know, I'm going through a very difficult time. I've just had to ask my partner to leave the house, or I've had to leave the house, and where their employers would actually like to give them that special leave, they haven't, you know, they haven't got it in place. So I think that it's there. It doesn't force anybody to admit to either their line manager or their employer in the private sector what they're going through. They still have the option to go for sick leave or holiday leave or whatever way they want to go around that. But I think that it's important that it's recognised, you know. So for me, that I suppose is the main issues in relation to those.
And on that Operation Encompass, I wouldn't be wanting to place a duty on the police that they must inform the school. You know, that has to be a judgment call for the police.
Sure, and you're right.
So to me, it is the legislative cover that if they wish to do it, that they can. And I think that's a distinction to draw out and potential amendment around it. Rachel?
Just to come in on the Operation Encompass, I still don't understand what the legislative barrier is for this. There is child protection legislation, child safeguarding legislation. The Children's Services Cooperation Act specifically states about the well-being of children. So I am really, really unsure still, and I know the department has given a bit of information on this, but what more do we need?
Yeah.
And we were talking earlier on about, you know, you don't have to put the details into the school. You don't, and that would be covered under GDPR. You wouldn't necessarily be allowed to. But if they're operating a pilot scheme, which hasn't started yet, and how are they doing a pilot scheme without having legislative cover? I don't understand that. Maybe I just don't understand the implementation of pilot schemes with regard to this. But how much more legislation do we need to share information about the well-being of children?
Yeah.
Just on that, Chair, my experience, and again I'm cynical, but sometimes the departments put in place pilot schemes to pilot something to death. Mm-hmm. So I don't trust at all pilot schemes. I just don't. I ask that fundamental question first when I see one coming up, and again the timing is like, so where is it? So I think if with those doubts, and with the doubts that I have, exactly the same, Rachel, like a clause, inserting a clause, even if it becomes a moot point, you know, I know we're talking about legislation here and we need to take it serious, but just by adding it in, I just give the confidence so that we don't have to ask the question, well, why can you not do this? What we're saying now is, yes, you can do this. And that might just be the difference in a clause and not having a clause. That's my views, and that's why I support not placing a duty on the police or any other safeguarding body, for that matter, but just allowing them the legislative cover to do so. And it would be interesting to know, and this is a question that I don't know, and that's why I'm asking it, because I think out loud sometimes, and that's very dangerous. If you give them legislative cover here, and then the law changes, a bill comes in next year, something to do with data protection or child protection, does this law then cover that? That's, I don't know, I'm asking that out loud, but that's something that we can see over a couple of weeks.
Is there any other comments around? I'm just trying to tease out if there's general view that we explore this further, because we want to go into closed session with Stephanie, because some of this will need a little bit of legal advice around scope and so on, and that'll help inform members. But I'm getting a general view, notwithstanding, you know, what more legislation do they need, there would be a general view that Operation Encompass is something that we should be pursuing, with a view of providing that legislative cover, not placing a duty that they must, but that there's legislative cover to share information. Then becomes an operational matter for the police if they want to utilise that provision that they can share information. That's not a territory that we're going into, but that's generally how I see members' discussions around Operation Encompass. Rachel?
Sorry, just to come back, I get the point that within the bill, the scope of the bill, and it's 2 or more occasions to prove that there's been domestic abuse offence. I get that. But I think what we need to tease out with the Operation Encompass is this is about incidents that obviously not necessarily form an offence yet because they haven't been taken to the police or prosecuted or, you know, submitted or investigated. So I understand where they're coming from in terms of within the scope of the bill that this might not be able to be in here. But that's still all the questions that I said previously alongside Paul. This is then for me, I don't know yet, But this surely is just an operational policy issue then, because all other legislation is there to, in my opinion, to back this up. So I get where this might not be within the scope, and I'm happy to further that conversation with Stephanie later on to see if that is something. I don't think it might, because it would only cover then of 2 or more incidences if it was an offence then. So one, say police were called out, and 2, at the first incident that had happened in the household. But couldn't let the school know, because if it was only in the bill, it could only happen if it was the 2nd or 3rd or 4th time that it was, called out, if you know what I mean. So it might not capture those single incidents, which obviously would form part of the offence. But if there's something then operationally that we can ask for, it might not. It might just be in the guidance. But just to have that in terms of information sharing, it could be captured there rather than be reliant on the scope of the bill.
Okay, and Sinead?
Yeah, I think everybody's intention is very good on this topic, but I am mindful that there are ramifications of whether we fit it into the bill or whether we're teasing out a very important operational piece of work that has to be done anyway. I just wonder what role the Education Committee will have in this, because obviously there are resource issues then once the school receives this information, so there will need to be a detailed look at it, with what actually to do with this information and how to use it well.
Okay. And on the other ones then around housing, are members content we explore this further with Stephanie? Is there a potential amendment and with Paul in terms of not placing a duty on the housing executive, if that is something that we can do in this bill? It's happening in other legislation. We've highlighted the issues around this in other jurisdictions, but not specifying then what that would look like for the housing executive, for example, but that there is a duty placed on them that they need to now reflect this in whatever scheme they come up when it comes to the allocation of houses. I don't think it would be for us to say that's worth 10 points or 100 points, but that we explore a duty on the housing executive that they now must reflect this in their allocation scheme. That's generally where I would be in terms of exploring that further with Stephanie. And I'm happy to explore the paid leave issue as well with Stephanie. Rachel?
Thanks, Chair. Yep, certainly happy to have that conversation. I would be interested to know, just in the department's response on this, said that discussions are ongoing in relation to this matter. Would like to know what those discussions are. And also the Communities Committee were briefed on this bill, and they had said that they were, their views were considered. So would like to know if their views have been considered, especially with relation to the explanatory memorandum or the guidance. And could this be an opportunity to have it included there? I think also we need to get an update from the Minister of Communities about where the housing allocation scheme consultation is, and if there's proposals coming down the line. Because as was mentioned earlier on, if we put inclusion in the duty of the housing executive and then the housing allocation scheme point system is then done again or removed or added into, we need to look at that. And then also the I remember, Linda, you raised this at a second stage debate, and in other times it's not always that we need to, or we do absolutely need to have provision of housing and safe, secure roofs over people's head if they leave the home, but also those who don't leave the home, because as we know, it is usually the victim and the victim with their children, and usually women that have to leave, and that's why the refuges are full to the brim. So how do we square that circle? So certainly something I would like to have discussion on further, but I would certainly like to know what discussions are ongoing in relation to this matter between the department and DFC, and also the views of the Communities Committee updated.
Okay. Then the other issue, I'm happy we've covered that we want to do something around domestic abuse commissioner, champion, advocate, and we can tease that out further with Stephanie as to what it is we're thinking about and how that would look in legislation. The stalking legislation piece that Paul had mentioned, again, I think generally members want to see this, that's why there's a bill coming forward, but we want to see the colour of the money of the department and hold their feet to the fire And are we able to do that in terms of putting forward our own amendment? What would that look like? Rachel?
Can we ask the department if they have a date confirmed of when they're going to submit the stalking legislation, or is that not information that could be?
Well, no, Christine can give us, they have told us when they hope to introduce the bill. Soon.
My recollection is November, December. But I can double check if you...
I appreciate that in terms of November, December. What I would be looking for, if available, was a confirmed date of introduction at first stage in the Assembly, and if it has been added to the, the business diary, let's say, if it's come through. I certainly, I recognise and support a standalone bill for stalking completely. Our stalking it's so bad in Northern Ireland, so we really do need it does need to be contained in a standalone bill. But I also have queries of whether or not we could put stalking into this bill, because we don't have it in place as criminal behaviour yet. Is that putting the cart before the horse? And obviously, if stalking as a provision was in this, it was not in this bill, but in a further time the stalking bill came in, obviously that would require an amendment to clause 13 for the alternative conviction. So sort of need a wee bit more information than that. But if we could if there is a confirmed date of submission to the Assembly for the stalking bill, then I would be content to not have to have this in here.
Just to confirm, the department for the meeting on the 3rd of September, the update on the stalking bill was the drafting of bill complete by the end of the summer, seek executive approval for introduction to Assembly, introduction November, December.
Maybe any other members here could tell me if the executive has approved that or not.
They'll be breaching executive confidentiality, and the parties in the executive would never do that to their colleagues. Okay, well, I think we do need to tease out, though, if we were looking at, and Stephanie will advise us here on scope and so on, and what would that look like by way of legislative text, to cover what issues, is something. So I'm happy that we'll tease that out further with Stephanie.
Okay, if I can come in.
Yeah.
This is very challenging, because the whole make-up of the bill is about family connection. No, that stalking isn't usually family connection. A bit like the upskirting piece too. So I'm struggling, really am. And even if you did get a really good clause, one clause doesn't do it for stalking. So for me, it really is just and I don't mean this disrespectfully to anyone, either legislation or the department, but it really just a pressure point, ultimately, to try and get something down sooner rather than later to assist victims.
Can I ask a quick question, because it's related? Could we at least ask the Minister, has it went to the executive, and have they, because obviously we don't know, we can't ask the other ministers, but the Minister can confirm if it's went to the executive and if there's agreement around it. So if we can ask that. And I think I'm still probably in the same place as Rachel, where there needs to be specific stalking legislation, and I think, to be fair, Paul is there too, but he's just, the concern is around, what if it doesn't, and we don't have anything. So, and then I'm wondering, is the upskirting piece better in that piece because of this legislation being around the family connection? And again, upskirting is generally, there is no family connection there. I don't recall having any case where there was an issue around things like that, where there was a family connection. So maybe in the stalking bill, that's where we could be looking at putting something around the upskirting. But I agree, it is important that it goes somewhere.
Sorry, Chair, just to come back on the upskirting bit, I know in the other parts of our pack that upskirting is to be included within the miscellaneous provisions bill, which is obviously coming down the line soon this year. But I suppose if and when the miscellaneous bill comes in and say upskirting is not in it, then this committee could look at putting an amendment to it.
Yeah, we can. I'm slightly concerned about whether this miscellaneous bill come forward, because they're starting to pull out some items that were going to be in it, and now we're getting it as an individual bill. So that indicates to me that there's some officials in the department don't want to hang their piece What's the one that
They're
I?
hedging their bets.
What's the one I picked out on personal injury?
Yeah,
Discount?
there's a separate personal injury bill.
There's a bill coming forward on the issue around the personal injury discount, which was meant to be in the miscellaneous bill. Now that's coming forward as a separate bill. I asked myself why, because I think there's concern that, yeah. So I'm just cognizant of that. Okay, well listen, let's tease out a little bit more with Stephanie around the issue around stalking legislation. I do think it's similar to the upskirting type offence, and some of the issues around it, and also then the issue around the rough sex and non-fatal strangulation is one that again we're keen to say the party is keen to pursue.
Sorry, Chair, could I just clarify, when we're writing to the department on the stalking legislation, does the committee want us to ask, can the upskirting offence be included, covered in that legislation, or are you content it's going into the miscellaneous?
No, I would like to ask, is it possible? Or would they look at it? Because if, as Paul says, they're looking at bringing other things forward, and we've been reassured on a number of occasions that the stalking legislation's come forward, but we're concerned about the miscellaneous one, then if the stalking one's coming forward in December and you're going to get that upskirting in there, and we're more confident that we might actually get that through in this mandate, if it can go in, why not?
Chair, have we explicitly asked the department about your concerns, why they're bringing forward an independent, or should we?
No, we haven't raised it. I've just observed that there's some, this bill's now coming forward as a standalone bill.
Yeah.
It just makes you suspicious.
Very cynical.
Yeah, but we can ask, in terms of the miscellaneous bill, that it is actually going to happen. So the training and support was mentioned as well by some members. As my own take around training and support, and I think it's kind of training, support, resourcing. Again, for me, I when I thought about this, how do you legislate for this? The mandatory training, but how do you legislate for what training, what financial support, what support structure? So you may be able to put into legislation that there must be mandatory training, but what is that mandatory training going to look like? What's the shape of it, the content of it, who's it all applicable to? And therefore, it just raises those questions for me that we may be able to put into legislation, that there needs to be additional financial support for the advocacy groups, for example, which is one of the things that some of the evidence provided. But what does that look like by way of legislation? So we could legislate that there needs to be financial support for this bill, there needs to be financial support for advocacy groups, there needs to be support for victims, but how do you specify that in law? And that was my only consideration as to whether or not that's something that we could take forward. So if we can tease that out with Stephanie, then I'm happy that we would, but that's just some of my own issues.
Chair, I would be in those pages too, even with the paid leave piece, because I just think that we're legislating into a private sector that their destiny should be their own in that regard. So I will probably need convinced on that, whilst employers should be looking at their employees and treating them with respect and trying to make sure that. So I'm not there yet, and also legislation that becomes all encompassing and putting duties on things, then I think that's where I start to lose belief in it. So I'm on your page there on that.
I think they're all they're all vitally important. I'm not convinced around how we would legislate for it, but let's tease that out with Stephanie.
Sorry, just on the paid leave, Chair, I don't think I exclusively come at it that it would be, because I recognise the private sector is a bit more challenging in terms of what can reasonably be expected, and that may be a collaborative approach with the private sector and Department for Communities in terms of the administration and the payments in that regard.
Yes, sorry,
With
Rachel.
regard to paid leave, we can tease this out later with Stephanie, but Department for the Economy is consulting on changes to paid leave in all sectors. So I don't see that there is, it might fall out of the scope of this bill, and again I'll come on to it later on, but have started work on private members' bill to that effect. But the Department for the Economy is already legislating for that, and that was for bereaved parents' leave. So it can, and that crosses all sectors. So I would hope that that would be something that, you know, I don't think anybody's going to be voting against bereaved parent leave. So it's certainly something that I think it's got support within the New Decade New Approach. So it's something that we need to consider. And obviously there would be concerns from different sectors in the economy, but this is about supporting people, especially those most vulnerable and in need of time off work.
Okay. Data collection and data sharing. Rachel, can you just elaborate a little bit more on that point that you were making?
Yep, so probably a bit drawn out, but the police collect statistics on certain offences and they publish them in a certain way. That is not the same as the data that is collected by the PPS or the judiciary. For this bill to be effective, there needs to be I would assume a broader data collection of, you know, victims, you know, their gender, that kind of thing, what, you know, maybe their ethnicity, just taking on the comments from the Migrant Centre. Because we don't collect that data. Obviously there would be data protection issues there, and that we can work through that. But if we have, say, the criminal justice system are working on the front line to prosecute an offence or piece of legislation who are not collecting or collating data in the same way, how can we effectively report on this? So I know that there are conversations going on within the department and sort of PPS and the judiciary, but if we are looking to see if this this bill has been effective in terms of getting prosecutions, but the data doesn't add up across the three sectors, say, that, or three bodies that are actually charged with charging this offence, how can we make sure that this is effective and it's doing what it needs to be doing if we're not collecting the same data and reporting on in the same way? So the police will at the moment have, say, data collection on incidents and offences. That will not necessarily be the same data that's collected by the PPS. And it's certainly not the way that the judiciary will be reporting on it. So Scotland have just published their it was a couple of Tuesdays ago, on the domestic abuse bill, and obviously the offence in terms of their public prosecution, which is different. I appreciate two different systems, but if we have the ability to, you know, annually show through statistics how effective this bill has been in comparison across all the bodies that are working on it, I think that's something that we need to be looking at. But it also raises the reporting. I would be looking to have a reporting requirement in this bill, and again, something I've started work on in terms of an amendment. Scotland have it after 3 years, and they report. We don't have a reporting requirement in this bill. How are we going to measure if it's been effective or not?
Yes, and that had tied up some of my thinking around the reporting review and what role an advocate type person could have, and is there scope then to have that included? So okay, no, that's just so it helps me get my head around what that issue was about.
Basically, Chair, it's just if we've got everybody in the criminal justice system, say for a domestic abuse offence, all reporting on different things and using different statistics. We've had conversations in this committee before about the use of data points from the department and how they measure things.
Yeah.
If everybody's measuring against different data points, how's that going to match up in terms of a report?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to filter that through the lens of what would you do by way of legislation, because again, I'm not sure how you would specify in law all of the different types of data that you want to see, but if there's a reporting requirement, well then, of course, logic flows that there has to be something to base that report upon, which you would then need to have approved or brought forward by the department as to what that is.
I don't think, Chair, just to tease that out, I don't think I would be looking for something specific in terms of what data points people, you know, collect data on, that could come from guidance and regulation.
Yeah.
But for the purposes of legislation, to put a duty on the department,
Yeah.
which would then include the criminal justice system, to
Yeah.
report on this legislation. Because how can we, you know, we're discussing this bill and about what should go in it and what should not go in it. In 10 years' time, are we going to know if that's been effective or not for victims?
Yeah. Yeah, no, okay. Then violence against women's and girls strategy was another one, Rachel, you had mentioned, which I know I had been looking at as well. And I suppose this is where I was again persuaded on the arguments around having the gender neutral legislation. And I was applying that school of thought to this issue around then if you have it in legislation around the violence against women's and girls strategy, is there a conflict there that in terms of the bill? That's my own thinking around it.
Chair, I appreciate the comments there. I don't think that there is a conflict there with regards to the bill. We're the only place in the UK without a violence against women and girls strategy. We have Westminster signing up to the Istanbul Convention, finally ratifying it, hopefully. You know, we have a duty to eradicate the reality of violence against women and girls internationally. So all the other jurisdictions in the UK have a violence against women and girls strategy already in place, regardless of their domestic abuse legislation. They're introducing legislation. We're the only one without it. So there is a gap in terms of provision and strategy for women and girls in Northern Ireland, and the only place in the UK without one. So I don't see a conflict with this legislation because no, there's not a conflict anywhere else.
I'm just taking it as read that it shouldn't need legislation to have a particular strategy. That's the view on it, as opposed to having to spell it out in law that you need to produce this.
I think, Chair, and it could be something to look at in guidance. I'm just mindful that the strategy that we do have on domestic abuse is gender neutral. But there's nothing there to specifically address the realities of the Istanbul Convention within this legislation.
Yeah, and this is where, in my own thinking, because it was raised before, there's different strands of what that domestic abuse looks like. So it could be, primarily we know it's women and girls, it is men, it is then LGBT, and it's, you know, within an overall strategy then you would anticipate there should be then different tailored strands of that focuses on where the key areas are or those particular groups, of which clearly there should be one on women and girls, but so there should be on other aspects of it for men, for LGBT, and that's where I can just see some of the challenges. And
Sure.
Sinead?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair. No, I think I really do believe there is a duty on us to have this strategy, but a lot of work has gone into the gender neutralisation of this bill, and rightly so, when we teased all of that out. And I guess there is an element of, if it doesn't fit here, where does it fit and when will it ever happen? And I take that point. But I do then wonder, when we go back to the terminology at the beginning of the bill about relationships and all of that, it would never do justice to the type of strategy and the breadth that the strategy would need to encompass. I think having it here, whilst I take Rachel's point about, you know, it's an opportunity to get it somewhere, I think it would be, the parameters of this bill would be too restrictive to what I imagine that strategy would need to be.
Can I?
Yes, sorry, Linda.
Because I actually agree with a lot of what Rachel's saying, but I also see how it would jar with this particular piece of legislation. And I accept what you're saying, Paul, in terms of, you know, the current strategy, and it should have different strands. But I'm not sure that goes far enough, because there does need to be a specific strategy around women and girls. And I think maybe if we could look at outside of this, putting a question as to why there isn't one, to ask for the rationale, and then that maybe is a piece of work that needs to be looked at. It is about violence against women and girls, so I don't see that there's anything to prevent it from being led within justice. So I think that we should look at it as a committee. But it's probably, for me, I would agree with sort of the thinking that it maybe doesn't fit in here. But I think it's right that it was brought up and that it was raised, that there's an issue. And I do think we should look at it as a committee about how do we actually look at pursuing a specific strategy again around violence against women and girls, because it is different, regardless of the fact that, you know, what we looked at in the legislation made it gender neutral, and I agree with actually that was the right thing to do. I think we need to protect everybody. However, there is specific issues, there is a specific problem, there is no doubt, and sometimes we look at the data in the very broadest sense, which is what we did for this legislation, and it looks like it's right to make something gender neutral, but when you look at other data and look at the specifics around who are the greater number of victims around, you know, specific types of violence, it is females, and that's the reality of the world we live in. So I think that we do need to put in place something to address that.
Chair, can I add just to that, because I agree with that, it's not always in a domestic setting. You know, that's why it's so much wider.
Yeah. Okay, well listen, I want to tease Stephanie out just on that as well. Then the parental and the alienation, Doug, you had mentioned, in respect of, I think it was non-mall orders and contact orders. And you're right, it is an issue that has been raised, and certainly in quite a lot of the individual witnesses, you know, that have provided evidence have raised this as an issue as well. I'm just trying to tease out then what would we be considering around parental alienation? Forgive me, by way of potential inclusion on this.
Sorry, I don't know which bill it is, but it's either the Scottish bill or the English and Welsh bill has a quite clear clause within it, Paul, and that clause just absolutely outlines it, because it is something which can be lost in the margin slightly, and it has a spin-off effect. So if it's contained within the domestic abuse bill, it spins off into other places. So we don't have the case where there's a contact order which has been given that can be ignored. And I think that's one of the reasons why it needs to be contained as something that's very defined, because it does look at the other issues. I mean, I've got an individual who's had a contact ordered for a full access to his children and hasn't seen them in 3 years because somebody has been able just to hide that in the legal system. Yeah. And I think if we can mention this and it becomes an offence to do that, and very defined offence to do that, I think we can deal with one of these problems. And it's not gender based, but it does affect an awful lot of men. Yeah. In this particular issue. So that's why I was looking to have it in there as not as a list of things that. Yes. That should be, but just and I remember I've got it in my mind's eye and I just can't find it. It's about 3-4 lines that was contained in the.
I know in the department, and we had talked about this a couple of weeks ago, the actual offence of parental alienation when it comes to abusive behaviour, coercive control, I believe clause 2 would deal with that. This point is more that you get a contact order and that's not being followed. That cycle of going back to court to say, actually, I got a contact order and it's being ignored. Yes. What greater sanction can be made available to give effect to that when it comes to contact orders, for example?
And that ignoring of a contact order becomes an offence in itself. It becomes abuse in itself to ignore a contact order. Yeah. So it's that sort of teasing that piece out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Paul?
I would agree with that 100%. When this bill was first muted about it being a domestic violence and family proceedings bill, that's where we got most of the traffic, people trying to contact us with regards to changing the law. There's two aspects for me in this. It is the contact orders and the misplacing of times. What venue was it again? Oh, sorry, I went to the wrong venue, and it really mucks people's lives up. So you prepared to take your child for a weekend, you prepared to pick them up or her up on Friday, and then they're not there, they're somewhere else. You were to pick them up at school, where did you know? And all of that miscommunication, which is deliberate in a lot of cases. There's that piece, and then there's the other piece about using court itself as a weapon. And you get the scenario where one partner or one parent gets legal aid and the other parent does not. And the parent with legal aid just goes all the time to court, and it drains the resource of the other parent, sometimes who actually has the responsibility of the child in most cases, and it just drains the family asset or savings. Now, there's a potential conflict here with regards access to justice, which we'll have to be mindful of, but I do think there's something needs put in here. And again, I don't know, I'm not convinced yet where family proceedings and the other bits it covers it at all. I don't believe it does. So I think now again with me the struggles is trying to get something that I have in my head down on paper, but I think we need to do something.
Chair.
Yeah, Linda.
On that, I have a concern around it, and I suppose it comes down to then how you would put it in. I have worked with quite a number of people who have this same challenges, and actually it will break your heart. You know, fathers who genuinely love their children and want to be part of their lives, and they're being blocked, and sometimes it's through absolute maliciousness, but sometimes it is a genuine and absolute fear from the mother's perspective, or the parent who has the child's perspective, that the children would be in danger with that partner, even though the contact order has been put in place, and we accept that everything, you know, has been decided by a judge. And I, in general, would say the courts have looked at this, and you have to accept and if you have a difficulty with the contact order, then you need to go back to court and challenge that. You just can't stop the child from seeing their other parent, and that would always be my advice in relation to that. But I can also understand the absolute fear of somebody if they think their child is in danger, you know, as a parent, and I'm quite sure, I mean, most people in this committee are parents, and we'd all accept that. So for me, there's a real challenge in this one, because I am concerned that we would have unintended consequences. So I would really like to hear what I suppose Stephanie would have to say in relation to this, and that's accepting all of the issues that we have in terms of trying to convince people to abide by their contact orders. And it is cruel, and it's a form of abuse in itself, without a doubt. But I'm really concerned about the unintended consequences, and particularly given currently. So currently you could have a domestic abuse case going on in the criminal courts, and the family courts not knowing about it. So therefore you have the issue of, you know, judges making contact orders in the absence of all of the information. So I'm concerned about it for that reason as much as anything else. If there was more of an alignment with all of the information, you might have less of these issues.
And Chair, if I can, and I know you're right, and everything you've just said, I absolutely agree with you. You're right, and I guess part of that is why I feel it needs to be named in the bill, because I think by naming it in the bill, it sort of makes it nearly indirectly forces people to actually sort of create that sort of holistic way of dealing with this. And I'm always mindful that you still have to prove that it is domestic abuse. You still have to prove it's abuse, you know. And you're absolutely right. There's some of the contact denial might not be viewed as abuse. It may be a genuine concern. So it has to be proven on you know 2 or 3 accounts. So I still see that burden of proof still being there, but. The point of it all being joined up, I think by putting it in the bill, it helps create that, where people sort of have that implied task where we have to create this as a joined up approach. But everything you said, I have got concerns as well, you know, and like Paul, it's how do you put this down, and what's the consequences of it if you do put it in?
Rachel?
Thanks, Chair. I would have shared concerns with Linda on this, just in terms of you've got to flip parental alienation and teasing that detail out on its head as well, because it could have unintended consequences when we're talking about. And I'm trying to protect the people that we are talking about. But in terms of the child contact orders, in the other issues that were raised, it said that, you know, about the Gillen review, and it set out a recommendation for the judiciary to consider this. So wondering if the judiciary has considered this. And the technical amendment that we looked at last week, maybe we were coming on to that, but that has got something to do with child contact orders within the family courts. So I think we need to discuss that. Is that enough? Is it technical? Is there anything that could be added on to that? And Paul, I'm glad that you mentioned legal aid. Certainly, if we're going to take, sort of in my opinion, if we're going to take financial abuse and as a domestic abuse, as a form of domestic abuse very seriously here, we need to be very, very mindful that regardless of somebody's means testing, it might on paper look as if they're loaded, absolutely loaded. But perhaps their course of control and their domestic abuse is purely financial and they have access to none of that what looks like on paper. I really do think that we need to look at financial eligibility of legal aid. I don't know, it's a touchy subject for people, but we're really, really going to consider financial abuse in the context of this bill. I do not believe that we can tell somebody who on paper looks like they are way above the threshold to get access to legal aid that they can't get it within the context of financial abuse. And I think that's something that we really need to consider. Is there an exemption of means testing with regard to legal aid in the context of domestic abuse? I'm mindful of have this conversation and there'll be people that could be open to abuse of this. But if we're really, really going to drill down into financial abuse, and I know this is huge, especially with older people, and that's what COP&I had stated, huge amount of work that they're going on in terms of financial abuse of a family member, which obviously would fall under this. How can we look at that in terms of access to justice? That those who are the victims of domestic abuse are not being, they're not getting enough support in the legal system just because on paper it looks as if they've got some money, because they might not.
Okay, and then equality screening you'd mentioned, Rachel.
Yeah.
This is more the query as to whether or not what was properly equality screened. I'm just wanting to teach, is that something that we're going to write to get clarity on, because I'm not sure it's a legislative amendment issue?
Thanks, Chair. No, I don't think this is something that we can put in. This is not a legislative amendment, but just reading the further equality screening section there's quite a lot in there. In terms of the consultation policy proposals no longer stand, and that the department could have breached its Section 75 duty. That's quite a big claim, and I think that we should get some more information on the department in response to that. That says that the children order and health and social care, the adoption bill, but I don't think the specific query over the consultation on the policy proposals and Section 75 screening stands in relation to the department's response here.
Okay, and then I think that is all the issues that I want. So I've got 16 down that I'm going to want to go through with Stephanie. So can I suggest we take a comfort break for 10 minutes just to allow Christine and Stephanie to go through those so that I can get a bit of structure to the closed session.
Linda said about teasing this out with Stephanie. I think we've teased Stephanie.
I know.
So let's reconvene at 12:15. Okay.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee